Okay, so we're going to put a texture on the coat, a real texture, just as an example. About knit texture. Reason I'm choosing knit, is because it has a pattern and it's flowing in one direction. Notice I go really high on the megapixels here. We can say even larger, like 6 megapixel. Ooh, like that. So this has got a pattern. It's not heading in one direction, but it is pretty cool. I'm going to copy this image. Head over to Photoshop. And I need a coloring book image in order to start the process. So, in this case, highlight this in object mode, polygons, UV snapshot. I'm going to call this body period TGA. Better to browse out and choose a folder to export this to. If you do not do that, you'll never find it. You will, but it'll be too late. So body UVs. And I would signify these somehow so you can get rid of them later. Size 2048 by 2048. Check that against here. So image size. Make sure it's 2048, 2048. Good. And down here below, I'm going to insert a blank. Go in here and fill that area with white. Oops, not checkers. That would be way too hard to see. So foreground. Now, if you're using Photoshop CS5, what you do is just invert the top one. So image adjustment invert. And let's go to channels and make sure that there's no alpha channel in here. If there is an alpha channel in here, delete it. Cool. So let's go get our pattern now. Copy image. This pattern might be too big to paste in. See what happens? Fail. If that's the case, we're going to have to open it. Save image as. In Photoshop, I'll just open that up. Okay, then we're going to take it and copy it. Once it's internal, we can do that. Should be able to. If not, right click here, duplicate layer, body UVs if. Perfect. So I'm going to shrink this down, and this is the most rookie mistake ever, is you want to take this and make it the longest one. So in this case, this is going to be your longest one, so I'm going to develop a patch for it. That way it'll be the right size for everyone else. Do not try to make this just like that and plop it down. That's horrible. Don't do that. This fabric is not straight on the character, nor is the character straight. It needs to be bent a little bit. to match the flow of these islands. Okay, let me show you how to tile this a little bit. First, I'm going to try to get it as small as possible for scale. Alt, click and drag will give you this, and I'm just going to choose to match the pattern up as best I can. You can use the arrow tool to kind of remedy any abnormalities there. Okay, then I'm going to be taking a brush, which is actually an eraser, choosing chalk, which is down here, number 17, taking brush and choosing to shape dynamics, angle jitter, all the way up. What this will do is rotate the brush a whole bunch of times, never leaving the same edge twice. Just like that. And then I'll want to repair the shading issue here. Okay, to do that, I can either use dodge or burn. If I dodge an area, let's say the top part here, this one, what I want to do is get it where it's bright as the same as below. Me, myself, I like to keep this really low as far as the exposure is concerned. Just a little easier to use and abuse that way. And I'm just going to take some of the shading out on both of these shells. Perfect, just like that. Blend it as best you can. Okay, again, just going to grab this using Alt, copy it again, and then try to align something up. Perfect. Alright, Control E will merge those down, and now I have a good shell. Now I don't want to ruin this shell, I want to make copies of it. So I'll make a copy. I'll put this one somewhere safe down here, out of sight, out of mind. And then I'm going to take this and just lower the opacity of it a little bit, so I can see the underlying UVs. Then I'm going to take the warp tool, which is right here, warp. And I'm going to warp these in a manner that makes them flow a little bit better with this. So I'm matching the contour of the UV shell. This will help in the blending of the textures across seams. I'm also looking at the pattern, so the pattern is going right up against, here's this median line, and I'm just kind of lining the pattern up for that. The warp tool works amazing for stuff like this. There we go. Okay, then I just duplicate this again, place it on top, repeat the process. This time I'm going to do the arms. Okay, now that I've already have this shell in place, my job is just lower the opacity and try to get it to bend around those UVs. Good. Now try to get these as close as possible and leave some wiggle room just in case I need to adjust. But for anything that you're not using, you can go ahead and go to the eraser tool and, erase within that area. Leave a little bit of wiggle room, as I said. I wouldn't want to do this because if I need to adjust it, I wouldn't be able to. Weird, I cannot undo that. Huh. Wow, it fell right outside. That is weird. Okay, so here's how you fix that. Go to the clone stamp tool. Make sure it's on current layer. And try to just fudge that area. There we go. You probably won't be using it anyway, but it's still nice to have a little bit of wiggle room. And just for areas like that, just that example right there says, hey, I need wiggle room. What happens if something like that happens right into the UV shell itself? Okay. Now, if I have one of these done, since the character is symmetrical, logic dictates that this will be the same. Okay, and also logic dictates if this is the back of that or the front of it, then I could probably use the same one over here. You don't want to scale these. You want to keep them the same size. Remember, they're uniformed. So if I do choose to scale them, I would have to scale all of them at once. All right. Just bring these all back up to the same opacity. Control E to merge them down. And try to repair any shading issues with either dodge or burn. Burn works like this. Okay, also turn it down. And if you only want to affect a certain range, let's say highlights only, notice now it's a little easier. So knock down some of these whites. And then randomness is fun too. Okay. Now the seams are going to be generated in an area anyway that's kind of closely related to the coat. So they'll be hid by nature. Alright, let's save this out. Coat _ color map TGA. Also save it as a Photoshop file. That way you can continue to add on if you choose to do so. Remember that the assignment for this is to get the UV checker on. This is just showing you the process of texturization to show you why it's so important to have these uniformed. Okay, here's Hypershade. Here is my coat color map, TGA. Click on it. If you double click on it, then double click the sample, you get a real sample. Name this coat, or actually it would be character underscore color map. Okay, go to textures, middle mouse button, click and drag that down to color, and then middle mouse button, click and drag that to your model. Alright, there we go. Let's remove the shading. Let's repair some of the UVs or normals. Not bad. So you can see a small seam right here. And look where that's at. So it's smack right in the middle of this. But it's also over here. So this edge goes from here to here to here to here. Okay, that means in Photoshop you can see the darker pattern right here compared to the lighter pattern here. So here's lighter, here's darker. So to repair that, again, try to get it as uniform as possible. Maybe a little dodge right in this area will greatly improve the looks back in Maya. So you could just save as TGA coat color map, save, OK. And then back in Maya, to update this texture, like I like to keep this on my secondary monitor, double click that, hit reload. I'll reload with this viewable. See? Magic. It's a lot better. Still a little bit of touch up, but that's why we hide our seams. We put them in areas where people are not looking. Put a belt in that area, whatever, but just uniform your color across the mesh. Highly saturated things like this are going to be viewable all the time. Last but not least, let's introduce you to Sponge, where you could desaturate things. Because the saturation level here is much darker or much brighter than the rest of it, especially right in this area. So that will allow you to get rid of some of those bright, huge greens in there. So once in a while, I'll hit that. Highly saturated things really do kind of look, I don't know. I like to have a little bit of adjustment, hue saturation. I like to desaturate things, but that's just me. I can always saturate things later on. Desaturation should be, I like the uniform desaturation, and then bust up or brighten saturation in areas that need it to emphasize different parts in the model. And I guess an example of that is, let's say I had a desaturated crate, right? I could saturate the edges a little bit and make them look a little bit worn. Okay, last thing, I'm just going to save that, reload it, I get a better blend. Cool. So there's the process of texturing, how it works, how I work it, and an example of why the spacing is so correct and so important. Now, what would happen if one of these were bigger? Well, obviously, the pattern would get thrown off. And you can see that these are now bigger than these. Okay, so let's go on to the next video. Alright, so this marks the end of the UV process on a character. So we went into details such as unwrapping, uniformed UVs, layout, texture example, checker example, and a workflow between Maya and Blender. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this process, and now your job is to get your mesh with the checkerboard pattern going all the way across it very uniformly. Enjoy.